Back in the 70s, you could buy a ticket to see a world-famous band for less than $10, but it still would have been a waste of money if the shows went as badly as these concerts did. In 1978, the Sex Pistols hit America for their first ever tour. It wasn't a good time for the band, though. Sid Vicious was suffering from some well-publicized addiction issues, Johnny Rotten wasn't getting along with his bandmates, and the group's manager Malcolm McLaren had decided to book them on a tour of the Bible Belt, hoping this would drum up some publicity for them. As drummer Paul Cook later explained, the band's presence in these areas turned out to be a little too controversial for comfort. They had sheriffs posted at every show and faced crowds who would fling bottles and pig ears flung at them. By the final stop at the Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco, the tour had taken its toll on the band.
Everyone was beat by them, really, and we just wanted to get it over with and get out.
5,000 people turned up for that show, and almost everything that could go wrong went wrong. In John Savage's book, England's Dreaming, guitarist Steve Jones recalled, "At Winterland, I had a cold. Sid wasn't playing the notes, and he wasn't even plugged in half the time. Me and Paul just wanted to play. I kept cutting out, strings breaking left, right, and center." To cap things off, Rotten's voice cracked, and it was Rotten who, after the end of their final song, turned to the crowd and said,
"Ever get the feeling you've been cheated? Good night."
And he walked off stage. The Sex Pistols broke up 4 days later. The death of Jim Morrison was one of the biggest rock and roll tragedies of the 1970s. A truly gifted musician, Morrison died at the age of 27 in 1971, and perhaps just as heartbreaking was the fact that this final show with the Doors at the Warehouse in New Orleans in 1970 proved to be one of the worst performances of his life. The wobble hit about midway through the band's set, as an intoxicated Morrison struggled to recall the lyrics. He even attempted to make a joke about this, but the crowd didn't seem to find any of this funny. Fittingly, the tension finally erupted during Light My Fire. According to attendees, Morrison balanced himself by hanging onto his mic stand throughout the song. When it came time for a solo, Morrison sat down on the drum riser for a breather. The only problem was that he didn't come back when he needed to start singing again. Drummer John Densmore attempted to draw his singer's attention by giving him a light kick, but all this did was enrage Morrison, who proceeded to wreck the mic stand and storm off stage. This was far from the first time that Morrison had displayed erratic behavior, and at this point, the rest of the Doors had had enough. The band broke up soon afterward, and Morrison was dead the following July. In July 1977, Pink Floyd played a huge show at the Olympic Stadium in Montreal, and when I say huge, I mean huge. In fact, some 80,000 to 100,000 people turned out to see them that night. But trouble soon began to brew between the band themselves and a group of instigators at the front of the stage. Before the show had even started, these folks started heckling and booing Pink Floyd. Weird to shell out cash for front row tickets just to ridicule a band, but you know what? Things only got worse after they began their set. It didn't take too long for the troublemakers to start throwing firecrackers at the stage. This would have annoyed any musician, of course, and Roger Waters was no different. When his patience snapped, he went off on an expletive-laden rant against the perpetrators. For a while, there was a legitimate concern that the band might walk off stage, but to their credit, they continued to play. A short time later, a roadie caught one of the people who had apparently been throwing firecrackers and brought him up onto the stage, where Waters proceeded to spit in his face. The hostile environment didn't dissipate after this either, and the performance continued with the band on edge for the rest of the show. But hey, it wasn't all bad. The travesty of this performance and Montreal's nightmare crowd later served as inspiration for certain aspects of Pink Floyd's definitive album, The Wall. Eric Clapton is widely regarded as one of the finest guitar players of all time. Despite all the accolades and plaudits, though, one performance became a stain on his whole career. In August 1976, Clapton performed at the Odeon in Birmingham, England. But what was meant to be a night of great music and good vibes took a sharp downward turn into something far uglier. According to reports, an intoxicated Clapton launched into an unprompted racist rant about immigrants in the United Kingdom. Those types of rants are rarely prompted. The performance wasn't recorded, so the specifics of what Clapton said broadly rely on the accounts of those who were in attendance. According to English Beat's David Wakeling, though, Clapton went off about how England would turn into what he called a colony within 10 years, urging so-called foreigners to leave while letting loose a flurry of racial slurs. Speaking about the incident, Wakeling explained how the crowd seemed shell-shocked by Clapton's tirade. Wakeling later told Rolling Stone, "As it went on, it was like, is this a joke? And then it became obvious that it wasn't. It started to form a sort of murmur throughout the crowd. He kept talking and the murmuring started to get louder." For his part, Clapton has never denied making the comments. Van Morrison has been around pretty much forever, and his career has hit some seriously impressive highs over the years, although most people remember him for this. Despite being a seasoned performer in the industry, Morrison was known to experience stage fright from time to time. In 1976, at a farewell show held by the unhelpfully named rock group The Band in San Francisco, Morrison almost didn't make it onto the stage due to his cold feet. It took his manager actually shoving him onto the stage to perform, though fortunately, the performance went off without a hitch. The same can't be said about a New York concert in September 1979, however. According to New Age magazine's Stephen Davis, who was in attendance, Van Morrison only lasted 4 songs before leaving the stage to the bewilderment of the audience, who had no idea what had just happened. This eventually became something of a trend with Morrison, as concertgoers never knew if they'd be treated to a sensational performance or a storm-off. In November 1973, The Who rolled into the San Francisco Cow Palace during the first leg of their American tour. The building was packed as the crowd waited to see one of the biggest rock bands of the day, a band that also featured notorious drummer Keith Moon, who developed a reputation in the music world for his onstage antics. That evening proved to be one of Moon's most infamous performances too, and for all the wrong reasons. The details remain murky when it comes to what Moon took before the gig, but the general understanding is that what he ingested was some form of elephant tranquilizer. By the time he went on stage, he was a mess. Halfway through a song, he stopped playing and passed out, collapsing backwards onto the stage. Moon awoke backstage and received a cortisone shot before insisting that he continue the show. So he went back out, and the exact same thing happened. It was a train wreck of a performance, one that forced the band to try to find someone to fill in on drums. The only person who probably did have a good time that night was Scott Halpin.
Can anybody play the drums?
Scott could. He was the fan from the audience who went on stage to help The Who finish their set. Rising from the ashes of Jefferson Airplane, Jefferson's Starship became a fixture in the rock and roll landscape of the 19th for sure. Visiting Germany that year, Jefferson's Starship missed out on the Wiesbaden leg of their tour when Grace Slick fell ill. Yet Slick and the crew went ahead with a concert the next night in Hamburg, which was probably an unwise decision in retrospect. Before the show, Slick drank heavily. When she made her way on stage, she started to berate the crowd, insulting them over World War II and giving Nazi salutes, infamously chanting, "Who won the war?" The concert was filmed by a German music television show, but unsurprisingly, it never aired on TV due to Slick's behavior. Slick later spoke about the show in Jeff Tamarkin's Got a Revolution, saying, "That's what that night was about, dumb, drunken decisions. So they started walking out, but they kept coming back like, maybe she'll do something really hideous and we will have missed it. A freak show." Slick left the band after the incident, although she would rejoin Jefferson Starship a few years later. For a while, the 1970 Isle of Wight Festival really did look like the place to be. It featured a lineup of incredible performers such as Joni Mitchell, Chris Christopherson, Jethro Tull, Jimi Hendrix, Sly and the Family Stone, The Who, and The Doors. No surprise then that the festival attracted over 600,000 people who camped and partied to the best of the era. It's just a shame that the bands themselves didn't have quite as much fun. A combination of crowd behavior and poor logistics soured the experience for many of the weekend's performers. Christopherson, for example, was booed off stage because of his track Blame It on the Stones, which the audience took as a slight against the Rolling Stones. Joni Mitchell also received a chorus of boos, and at one point her set was interrupted by a gate-crashing hippie.
Groovy, I know.
Meanwhile, Sly and the Family Stone abandoned their set after a concertgoer chucked a can that hit the group's guitarist, Freddie Stone. The weekend is also known for hosting a performance by The Doors that, because nobody told the band they needed to bring their own lighting package, was basically impossible to actually see. While most people remember Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley as the de facto leaders of KISS, every member contributed to the music in some way or another. It wasn't unusual for the different bandmates to actually sing the songs they wrote, even if they weren't the designated frontmen of the band. For example, the popular ballad Beth from the 1976 album Destroyer was written and sung by KISS drummer Peter Criss, aka the Catman. During a show in 1979, Criss got the opportunity to step away from his drum kit and belt out Beth to the audience. There was one problem though. The Catman was reported to have been drinking heavily beforehand, so by the time it came to perform Beth, he had forgotten the words to the song. A year later, Criss was gone from the band, although whether he was fired or quit kinda depends on who you're asking. From Roll Over Beethoven to Johnny B. Good, Chuck Berry's iconic music has influenced musicians for generations. In 1972, Berry collaborated with former Beatle John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono on The Mike Douglas Show. The allure of the performance rested on the fact that both Berry and Lennon were such icons in the world of music. Ono was also a musician, yes, but she had an eccentric quality to her vocals that didn't exactly appeal to the mainstream at the time. The performance started off strong as Lennon and Berry played Berry's Memphis, Tennessee, but it soon went pear-shaped when Ono chimed in. A sound engineer turned down Ono's vocals in the mix, either because they realized just how jarring she was or because they saw Berry's reaction. Either way, it's fair to say that Ono probably should have sat this one out.